Okay, that's fine.
What would be the issue?
Yes, you really have to go close.
I really have to go close.
Really do.
Okay. All right. Is that working? Yes. It is? Okay, I just can't hear myself. Everyone, welcome tonight to our CYC talk. My name is Maria, one of the members of our CYC committee from Prophet Elias. And I'd just like to introduce our talk for this evening. And I'm not sure whether many of you know this, but our current Patriarch Bartholomew has, due to his efforts with regards to protecting the environment, has actually been dubbed the Green Patriarch, which is something I didn't learn until quite recently. So our talk will be focusing on that tonight and our duty as Orthodox Christians to look after the environment. And this portion of our talk will be presented by Dr. Evangeline Manzioris, who's also the Program Director of Nutrition and Food Science at UniSA, so we welcome her expertise on this topic. And following on from this, we'll have Father Silouan have a talk regarding how we can apply this sort of asceticism in our everyday life. So hopefully all of us can take home some practical tips that we can apply when it comes to fasting. And so I'd just like to call Father Silouan to open our talk with prayer.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, Amen. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our sins as we forgive those who sin against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For yours is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, now and ever to the ages of ages. Amen.
Good evening, everybody. Lovely to be here. And I've got to say, it's nice to have a prayer before I do a lecture because it makes me feel somewhat safer. Because normally when I do a lecture at UniSA, I expect to have things thrown at me, have people fall asleep, people walk out during the lecture, all sorts of things. So thank you so much, Father Silouan, for starting us off in prayer. And what I wanted to talk about today, and I sort of pressured the Central Youth Committee into this talk. So thank you so much for allowing me to do this talk, because it's all about sustainable eating and how what we do with our food has a big influence on the environment. And just to start off, as Maria said, the Patriarch Bartholomew is actually known as the Green Patriarch. And I don't know if you can see this, because that's the problem if you sit down the back of the lecture theatre, is you can't see the notes properly. But it says, in a way that is profoundly loyal to the tradition of worship and the reflection in the Eastern Orthodox Church, Bartholomew has insisted that ecological questions are essentially spiritual ones. Probably more than any other religious leader from any other faith, this brave and visionary pastor has put squarely on our agenda the question of how we express spiritual responsibility for the world we live in. And he was named by the Time magazine one of the most 100 influential people in the world today because of the work he's doing in looking at, protecting the environment, the world we live in, the world that was created for us. So this is a book that's been written by the Patriarch, and it has lots and lots of his lectures, sermons on this very topic. And, it's an amazing book. And to pick something out of it is very difficult, but I came up with this one. To commit a crime against the natural world is a sin. For human beings to cause species to become extinct and to destroy the biological diversity of God's creation, for human beings to degrade the integrity of the earth by causing changes in its climate, by stripping the earth of its natural forests or by destroying its wetlands, for human beings to injure other human beings with disease by contaminating the earth's waters, its lands, its airs and its life with poisonous substance, all of these are sins. Now, I can't talk to all of these areas. My background is as a dietitian. I've worked as a dietitian and nutritionist now for the last, I hate to say this, almost 30 years of my life. So I've been heavily involved in the area. And the area that we can influence, well, I can influence people, and I try to influence people, is through what they consume and how that affects our environment. And it's lucky, and I hope that most of you have had dinner, because if you hadn't, I probably would put you off your meal. And for those of you that have had dinner, you're probably going to get indigestion now. So I have this tendency to do this to people. So we'll start off and look at environmental sustainability. And yes, we've seen that it's a big area that takes up the patriarch's time, but it's also a big area that takes up health and also environment. So from the Public Health Association, the 2009 World Federation, this was the declaration that they came up with. Human health and well-being depend on and are inseparable from the health, welfare and maintenance of the living world and the biosphere. We are connected, whether we take it from the spiritual side or not. There is a connection between human beings and how we live on this earth. And what we do with our food is a critical one. Now, also for the last 30 years, I've been involved in educating both at the tertiary hospital level, in private practice, through public talks, but also in the last 10 years where I've been teaching at UniSA about how we can protect human beings from diseases. And you can see this here, and I don't know if you can quite make it out. There's a guy who's sitting on the couch, he's got a Big Mac in front of him, he's watching TV, so he's inactive, he's eating poor food, but what you can also see, this is actually a statue that's submerged in the ocean. And the purpose of this is it reflects that what we're doing to our environment is causing, the melting of the ice caps and increasing the amount of water and, potentially in the future, what might happen to low-lying lands. So the two are really closely linked together. And I just wanted to show you these photos. And there's a whole series of them, and they've been taken, and it just shows us the food that different families in different countries eat in 1 week. Okay? I haven't got lots and lots of them, just a few. And this is a family from Mali, and this is their food expenditure for 1 week, which is the equivalent of $26 US. You can see they all look pretty healthy, they're of normal weight range, yet that amount of food they've got there is what feeds that whole family for the week. So you can see it's pretty sparse, it's very low in processed foods, it's all whole foods, very small intake. This family here, $1.23 is what they eat in 1 week, US dollars. And you can see the amount of food they've got there. Once again, they look fairly healthy. They may be small for size, can't tell because we don't know the age of the children, but once again in shad, very minimal intake. And we contrast this to the photos from the US. This is food for 1 week, $340. Anyone pick a difference between the first two photos and this one? This is going to be a real lecture, guys, and I'm asking you questions.
It's very processed, lots of packaging.
Yeah, lots and lots of packaging, highly processed. Can't see a lot of whole food there, can we? There's some fruits here in the middle, some veggies, lots of drinks, basically what we call junk food. And then the last photo as well by Menzel, family in Germany, $500 US. What do people think? Sorry, what was that?
They're drinking a lot.
They are drinking a lot, aren't they? A lot of bottled water, beer, juices, pizza. I mean, there's a bit of unprocessed food there with fruit and vegetables, but still highly processed diets. So Menzel went and took these photos across the world reflecting the different dietary intakes from different countries. And it sort of comes out of the theme as the developed countries are actually eating more of the processed foods and increasing the burden that we're putting on our environment, whilst those people in third world countries are consuming unprocessed foods, which, by the by, is very healthy for them, probably not enough, and having a low impact on the environment. And it continues to be countries like ours that have the biggest impact on the environment. So, this is just some of the things I'm going to look at in this talk. Please ask questions as I go along, because if you guys don't ask questions, I'll ask them back to you. So that's what we do. So we'll cover a few areas, but one of the biggest problems with food and the environment is the amount of food waste and keeping what we're eating sustainable. So, you know, I know most of us here are Greek and go, well, what sort of food waste do we have? Who thinks they waste food at home? A few hands going up. Yeah. Who thinks they could do better? Yeah. Who reckons there's no food waste at home? Okay, yep, pretty good, pretty impressive. Well, maybe not so impressive, what am I saying? Okay, I'm just going to, hopefully this will work, show you this video clip.
Meet the Australian fridge, bursting with food, but how much of it do we actually eat? Less than you might think. Australians throw out 4.45 million tonnes of food every year, 936 kilograms for every household. All up, that's about a quarter of the food we buy, the equivalent of $5.2 billion, more than we spend on the army. And that's only the tip of the foodberg. We also waste the food it takes to grow the food. Consider what goes into a steak. 40% of all the wheat, rice and corn humans grow is used to feed animals. In developed countries, every kilo of beef requires about 10 kilos of cereals and up to 100,000 litres of water. Our squeamishness makes us even bigger wasters. Most Australians are only willing to eat certain parts of the animals we slaughter. 46% of the edible cow carcass is sold off cheaply for pet food and other uses. What does go to the supermarket shelf can also be wasted. 7% will be thrown away by the store, unsold or damaged, and 30% will be discarded in our homes, uncooked or left over. Vegetables aren't free from cost either. Every kilo of potatoes takes 500 litres of water to produce. Throwing out a kilo of white rice wastes 1,550 litres. Oh, and it costs 140 litres of water to make a cup of coffee. And then there's the beauty test. It's estimated that 20 to 40% of all fruit and vegetables are rejected by supermarkets because they don't meet visual standards. In Queensland, 100,000 tonnes of bananas, about a third of the annual crop, are thrown out each year because they aren't pretty enough, or because they've fallen from a tree and touched the ground. And according to the CSIRO, 54% of Australian mangoes, more than half of the fruit produced, is thrown away. If you add up the food Australia wastes each year, it's enough to fill 720,000 garbage trucks. Placed end to end, the convoy would bridge the gap between Australia and New Zealand 4 times. To put that in perspective, just a quarter of the food wasted in the first world could feed all the people starving in the third world. Your fridge. Just another rest stop on the wasteful journey from farmyard to rubbish tip.
I've never played such heavy rock music in a lecture. Quite exciting. So what do people think? It's great standing here because I can see your reactions, especially yours. So any comments about that?
It's horrific.
It's horrific, isn't it?
It's shameful.
Shameful. And that's the average. Everyone, on average, in this room throws out a quarter of the food they purchase. So if I don't throw out a quarter of the food I purchase, someone else is making up for my part, okay? So it's a huge, huge problem. And they're absolutely right. There is enough food to feed the whole world. I mean, there is an issue of how you get it to them, but we are throwing out food and we're not using it. And it's not just a problem that it's throwing out, it's what it does to the environment that's the problem as well, okay? So, And once again, this here, it's not a very clear graph, sorry, but I'll explain it. This here along the vertical axis shows us the amount of carbon dioxide. And this here shows us all the countries, all the major countries, developing countries in the world. And this shows the total greenhouse gases from each of these countries. This is China, this is the USA, and this, in red, is food waste. If food waste was a country, it is the third biggest emitter of greenhouse gases in the world.
Can you define waste?
Food waste, food that's thrown out in the bin.
What happens if it's contaminated food?
Well, that's still counted as food waste.
But you wouldn't eat it if it's contaminated.
That's right, but there's ways of getting around that. So it's all about, and we'll talk about that, about how do you manage your fridge so that you don't have food that goes off.
Well, they mentioned food landing on the ground and not eating it.
Yeah, but it's, I mean, often we buy more than we need, right? And there was this great thing done, what's that guy from, he was on ABC.
Oh, War on Waste, yeah.
Yeah, the War on Waste, and he had this clip where he was actually in a supermarket car park, and as people would roll out with their trolleys, he would actually just take a bin and say, I'm taking a quarter of your food, because it's going straight into the bin. And they're going, no, don't do it. But, yeah, so it's about how do you manage it? You know, how do you manage the leftovers so they don't get contaminated? So that's the thing we've all got to think about. Like, we're all probably not keen on throwing out food, that's fine, but it includes the food that goes off. How do you manage that? So we'll get to that. So, third largest greenhouse gas emitter in the world is food waste, right? So, the food waste can be in terms at the paddock, where there is an overproduction of food, or the stores, Woolies, Coles, doesn't want to get bananas that aren't the right shape. They don't want food that looks ugly. You know, you've heard of the ugly fruit and veg? So that is just dumped like that. And if it's actually just buried in the soil, that's when it emits the methane gases, which contribute to the greenhouse gases. So that's one part of the journey. The second part is at home, where you perhaps over-purchase on food and you ditch it, or you have a party. And which Greek doesn't over-cater at all the functions they do, right? Everyone's guilty of that. And then you ditch the rest. Another area of food waste, and these are actual photos, my son's school. And it's the sort of things I do when I go and pick up my son from primary school. I know. I'm the weird mum that takes photos of the rubbish bin. But look at the food in there. Not only is there a lot of food wasted, but a lot of plastic in there as well. And then this one, still me taking photos, a restaurant on the parade, right? And this was what was left on the plate. My daughter is now really embarrassed. Everyone seems we can pick who my daughter is. She's gone the brightest red. So you can see half a pizza left. Obviously 2 people ate. Half a pizza left, half a bowl of pasta left over in this restaurant. So, what can you do to avoid these situations? We're all guilty of it. It's a matter of thinking through, well, what do we do? Okay, first of all, let's start buying those ugly fruit and veg. Let's start telling the supermarkets what we want, because they respond to us, okay? Everything they put on the supermarket shelves is because they perceive we want it. So we can influence them in that way. At the household level is, well, buy less food. If there's leftovers, freeze them. Be aware of use-by dates, best before dates, all that sort of stuff. If the vegetables are looking like they're going to go off, perhaps parboiling them and freezing them parboiled so you can then pull them out later. Kids and lunch boxes, well, strict instructions to my son that he always brings home whatever he has, and he has it as his after-school snack if he doesn't finish it off at school. And then restaurants.
Doggy bags.
Doggy bags, that's right. Ask for a doggy bag. If you always have food left over when you go to the restaurant, order less. Right? It's sort of easy. Well, sort of easy. And then at the supermarkets. This is a supermarket in France. I wish I could say I'd taken this photo because that would have meant I'd been there, but this is from the internet. France now, for about a year, has banned that any food gets thrown away at supermarkets. So every food has to be sent off to somewhere else to be used up in some way. And obviously the supermarkets don't want to do this, do they? Because that's going to cost them money. So they're going to reduce how much they're selling and trying to match purchasing with what they sell on the supermarket shelves. But we've got that here in Australia. Does anyone know the name of the organisation that retrieves food? Oz Harvest, yeah. And they do a great job of retrieving food from conference centres, convention centres, and getting the food out, and they store it safely, and then they reuse it for people who don't have enough food. So it's getting food saved, doesn't get wasted, doesn't decompose, and it gets to people that need the food. So they're also a really great organisation. And along the side, they do a lot of nutrition and cooking classes to help people to learn how to cook with leftover foods. So a really good organisation there. And so here's our ugly fruit and veg. I'm also on Twitter, pretty nerdy, and I love taking photos of ugly fruit and veg and popping them up. And you can get some real beauties there. You know, that carrot, the apple, you know, they're all pretty grotesque, but amazingly they taste exactly the same. And all of us would have had our parents and grandparents shocked at the amount of food that would have been thrown away, given what their background was if, you know, they grew up during the war. So, yep, all those ugly fruit vegetables are great. So the UN, this is a big concern for the UN, and they've looked at what food waste consumes. So they've analysed it, and food waste consumes 21% of all the fresh water that's available on the earth. It uses up 19% of all our fertilisers, 18% of cropland is used to grow food that then gets thrown away. And it fills up 21% of landfill. And when it goes into landfill, that's when it produces methane. So what can you do? We've got best before dates on our food, and we've also got use by dates. There is best before dates actually just means it tastes better if you consume it before that day. Okay? That's all it means. It doesn't mean that its microbiological quality alters. And even some foods will still taste fine after that. The laws state that you must have at least 2 years on the best before date. But honey, for example, will last forever. Some of our best wines are more than 2 years. So that's all it means. The use by date means that after this date, it's microbiologically unsafe. But they normally have about a day around it. So you can tell if milk's off. Sometimes if you open up milk on the use by date, you can have a sniff of it, and if it smells fine, you're going to be fine with it. Yogurt is one of those weird ones that's actually got a best before date and not a use by date, and that's because the microbes in there start to drop down by the best before date. And the purpose of eating yogurt is to get all the microbes in it, so that's why it's got a best before date, so it's still fine thereafter. Shop locally and buy from community-supported agricultural programs. We'll talk a little bit about that. But if you can buy local, that's the best in terms of food miles. And then home composting actually prevents the food from being converted to methane gases. So if you stuff up, if you have leftover food, put it in those compost bins if you've got one in your yard. Or most councils now have those little kitchen tidy bins. Everyone's got them, and you can put your food in there, and that gets composted by zero waste.
How does it not convert to methane? If it's because I imagine if it's an enclosed unit, I would have thought.
There's always someone in the crowd who asks a question that the lecturer doesn't know, and I'm going to pick on my daughter. Do you know Sophia? Do you know why it goes to methane in a closed environment? No. It's because with the composting, you're meant to be turning it around, and you get air mixing up into it. As for the chemical reaction, I don't know.
You have worms in there eating it,
Yep, the worms help it as well. That's right. But what the chemical reaction is?
I was just wondering. I guess that it was the turning part that I hadn't factored in.
Yeah. That you get the So, okay. So food waste isn't the only thing. I'm continuing to make you feel really bad and go, well, let's have a look at the water footprint. Okay, so the water footprint refers to how much water does it take to make the food you're eating. And this is just a table of different amounts. So here, 1 cup of coffee uses 250 mils of water. Actually takes 140 litres of water to make. Okay.
Sorry, what do you mean by that?
To grow the coffee beans, to transport the coffee beans, the whole process from growing, to finish. A cup of tea is a little better, 35 litres. A cup of beer, 74 litres. So if you're going home to watch the World Cup, have a cup of tea instead. You won't get as angry as well. This is a bit sad. 100 grams of chocolate, 1,700 litres of water. Yeah. No one likes me anymore, do they?
I'm sure it's wrong.
A kilo of beef. Can someone read this out for me?
20,000.
20 to 50,000 litres of water for 1 kilo of beef. Huge, isn't it? Huge.
How do they work that out?
And there's always a doubter in the crowd. They look at, so it gives us a range, and that's because it looks at the best farming practice and the worst farming practice. Takes into account how much water is needed to grow the crops that the cows need. And it includes groundwater. Okay.
And rain?
And rain.
Right.
Everything. So it's the total amount of total water that's used. There is figures for whether it's grey or green water or blue water, but that's the total amount of water that's used to make it. And that also includes the water that's used in the process of sacrificing the animal as well. So the whole process and transportation.
Sorry, what's grey, green and blue water?
Blue water, I'm looking at my daughter, do you know this? Cheapers, I've sent her to uni and she doesn't know this. Blue water is water that people can drink. Green water is water that's been recycled and can be used for crops but isn't safe necessarily for consumption. And then grey water is the polluted water. Yeah. Kilo of rice, 1,500 litres. A kilo of potatoes, 500 litres. We saw that in the video. 500 mils of soft drink, 170 to 310 litres. 125 mils of wine, 110 litres. And a litre of bottled water, 1.32 litres. Because you're using water in the process of making the water and cleaning equipment. So all of that is the amount. But the standout there is the kilo of beef. Okay? And what happens when people waste it? Mel, how are you feeling?
I think I'll eat lamb from now.
You're implying that if it uses a lot of water, then it's a bad thing, is it?
That's right. So the argument is, in an area where we don't have enough water and people are consuming these foods, what is the impact on the environment?
Good question. If human beings were like beef, and
How much water do we cost? Yeah. We would cost less water if we ate beans. So to put it into perspective, the quantity of water required to produce 450 grams of beef is equivalent to 6 months' worth of daily 7-minute showers.
Who has 7-minute showers?
So that's what they do in Greece. They don't shower and they eat the beef. Throwing away one burger wastes the same amount of water as a 90-minute shower. So it's also thinking about when you throw out the food. Now, I'm not saying don't eat meat, okay? What I'm saying is what happens when you throw this stuff out, okay? This is the amount of water you're wasting. It's like you just go turn on the shower for 90 minutes. So next time you throw out that burger, just go and turn the shower on for 90 minutes. Would you do that? You'd never consider doing it, would you? Yet people throw away the food. So it's all about considering food waste and its impact. Okay, it doesn't get any better. This one's looking at carbon footprint. Okay? Transportation, powering our homes and food. Which one do you think makes the biggest impact on our carbon footprint? It's pretty obvious now, isn't it? Yeah. Yet we spend so much time Working out what cars to buy that are going to be more energy efficient. Let's put up solar panels so we can, not use as much coal-burning electricity. But what about the food we buy? Okay, and you've got a good idea of where I'm going with this now, right? This is a recent article that was produced that looks at the amount that livestock produces in relation to what it uses up. So animal food gives us only 18% of our calories. It gives us 37% of our protein, but uses 83% of the land to grow the feed that's needed for the animals to grow. Greenhouse gas emissions, 58%, for only 18% of our calories. Do we have any accountants here?
Mr. Company.
Where is he? Who's Mr. No. But you wouldn't do it, would you? If it was an economic thing, you wouldn't do it, would you? Calories, 18% of the calories and using up 83% of the land. It's not a good economic option, is it? No. Water pollution, 57%. Air pollution, 56%. And the amount of fresh water that's taken out of our daily system is 33%. Okay? And then this is a table that looks at, and this one's for you, I reckon, Mel. I'm picking on Mel, sorry, I know Mel too well. It looks at commonly consumed foods and looks at the 3 greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide and methane. And here's our chicken, and that produces total, right at the end, 4.3. Okay? You can see that beef is down the bottom at 30. So it produces almost 10 times the amount compared to chicken. And your lamb is similar to beef. Sorry, Mel. So instead of lamb, we're going to go for chicken, right? Does anyone know why? Sorry, what? This is exactly like a lecture, Someone says a funny joke, I don't hear it, and everybody laughs. And you really hope they're not making jokes of you, but rather the subject matter.
No, it was that we should go for the carrots instead.
Oh, the carrots, yes, carrots. But does anyone know why beef is so high, and lamb will be here as well, compared to pork and chicken? Sorry? Yes, ruminants. So beef and lamb are ruminants, which means they produce methane. And they also generally only produce one offspring. Whilst chicken and pork are monogastric animals, they don't produce methane gas, and they have more than one live birth. So you get better bang for buck in terms of the kids that are made from it. So cheese is high, pork is getting down, cod, eggs. And this is a Swedish study, so they've differentiated whether they've grown in Sweden or they were transported over to Sweden. And you can see, even if it's oranges transported by boat, it's still quite low. Potatoes. So you can see a nice pattern. Can anyone pick the pattern we're getting here? I'm setting this up for you, Father Ceylon. Can anyone...
Vegetarian diets are better in terms of carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide emissions.
And water footprint. And you don't waste as much because they last for longer. So the time that they get off isn't as, as high. So then we've got the cod, the soybeans, fasolia, all sorts of fasolia would be very similar. This here, then people go, but you've got some farmers that don't know how to grow it properly. And this looks at the range of someone who grows it very well, we look at beef, and someone who grows it very poorly. And you can see even the best growing cattle farmer, the carbon dioxide equivalents are still much higher than any other food group. Okay? So you can see eggs, poultry are low, nuts and peas, that would be similar to the legumes.
The key thing here is you've given us information about each individual food. Has anybody, anywhere in the world, ever put together what a properly balanced diet, taking into account fasting and so on, where you've got that amount of beef and that amount of vegetables, what is the footprint involved there?
Yeah, I'm getting there.
Okay.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
important.
yep.
The rest of it doesn't.
Well, it it does, because I need the reason to convince you to change, you see. So, once again, dark chocolate, the best producers of dark chocolate and the worst, and likewise with rice and wheat and rye for kilos of carbon dioxide. And then this shows the levels of the different protein foods in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, the acidification and eutrophication. And acidification is the acidification of the oceans, where the acid level increases in them, and the eutrophication is the level of nutrients that go into the water from the flow off the fertilisers that are used in farmlands, and how that causes dead pockets in the sea. So it depletes, because the plants grow really well in those areas, it depletes the oxygen and causes dead zones, so that fish can't grow there. And Sophia, was it 7 or 3 million? 7 million people, I think it was 7 million. 7 million people rely on their local fishing areas for food to survive. And if there's dead zones around there because of the eutrophication, they're not getting their food supplies. So once again, we see the same pattern. Beef and lamb up the top, and then as you're going down into the white meats and into the vegetarian sources of protein, it reduces quite substantially. The other thing, this is a supermarket. You can see it's highly processed foods, and the processing process also uses up a lot of resources, greenhouse gases, water, and also the plastic, so they're also of concern. Now, getting to where the question you are asking, does anyone recognise this? Has anyone seen this before? Yes. Yeah, it's the Australian Guide to Healthy Eating. And this was put together about 4 years ago now, and it reflects the most healthy eating pattern, which leads to the lowest rate of disease. And it's based on researchers, scientists, doctors, professors, nutritionists, looking at over 55,000 individual scientific articles to get this information and find the pattern of diet which is best associated with the lowest incidence of disease. And if you follow the AGHE, your risk of developing chronic diseases drops by 50%. Okay? That's better than Paleo Pete Evans can promise, right? So, and this is meant to represent your plate. Most of it is consumed through breads and grains, high intake of vegetables, legumes and beans, fruit, little bit of the protein food. And whilst there's meat on here, there's also the legumes and then also the dairy products. These here are the sometimes foods, which we eat in small amounts. They're the ones that are most significantly linked to increased risk of disease, but also they're the ones that are the big costs in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. And then using in small amounts is the oils. What we've also known is that this dietary pattern is the best one to follow to minimise the greenhouse gas emissions and the impact on the environment. But there is one better, and it could only be said by a Greek, and it's the Mediterranean diet. This is the diet that your parents, grandparents grew up on. It has been recognised as the pattern that contributes to the lowest form of chronic diseases, and it was actually identified in Crete in the 1960s. And the Greek government actually commissioned the Rockefeller Health Foundation from the US to go to Crete and find out how the Americans could help the Greeks lead a healthier life. You know where this is going, right? And what they found was that the Greeks in this part of Cyprus actually had the lowest rate of heart disease, the lowest rate of cancers, and this was despite, this is also believable, the worst medical services, the worst financial, positioning that the island could be in, and the highest rate of smoking, right? Yeah, they had the lowest rate of disease, and it's attributed to this. And what we can see is that meat is eaten in very small amounts. And I think that this pyramid actually overestimates the meat. Because if you talk to people from that time, they say we were lucky to eat meat once every 3 months. Because when the Horior had a yorti, Pascha, Christuyana, and the local church celebrating is when they would sacrifice an animal. Okay? So this isn't about not eating meat, okay? I eat meat, I like it, right? It's about not wasting it. It's about eating it in small amounts because it satisfies both the requirements for the best outcome in health and also for the planet, okay?
Did you say that was Crete or Cyprus?
Crete, the Cretan hope. Did I go between the two? Yeah, that's old age. Good. No, sorry. I did that purposely just to make sure you were listening. Well done. You get a HD. So yeah, it was the Cretan cohort. Yeah. So really high in fruits and vegetables, grains and cereals. They would eat about 8 slices of whole grain bread a day. Not white bread, whole grain. Does anyone know how much olive oil they would consume? And what's recommended in this dietary pattern? Any guesses? 80 meals a day, every person. Right? And that was their only source of fat in their diet. So they ate about 30 grams of meat, very small meat intake. Eggs were reserved for the children. Milk wasn't consumed because it was used to make yogurt and cheese because it would last longer, so they didn't have to throw it out. So they were also doing really environmentally, important things. Every bit of the food was always consumed, okay? All the animal was used up. You'd all be aware of the glikotokotoliu, where they'd use the scraps of the vegetables. And I remember when I'd go to Greece and Rellies would go, eat this one and guess what it is. I had no idea what it was. And it was a baby eggplant that had fallen off the plant and they saved it to, and to keep it. So, the Mediterranean diet does come out as being the healthiest and the most environmentally sustainable, but it's not dissimilar to the AGHE because here it gives the option of all the nuts in that protein group. So they're actually pretty similar, except that the Mediterranean diet has more of a focus on the oil and being very, very little meat. So that's it for me. No, it's not, sorry, I lied. That's what all... This is where I ask you guys the questions. What can we do? There's so much food waste.
One small thing that comes to mind is usually if it's a non-fasting day and I'm going out for food, I always buy something with meat in it. Because I'm like, it's a non-fasting day, I can eat meat, so I will. Yeah. Even if I don't really care if I have it or not. Yeah. So I think it would just be a matter of ordering more vegetarian meals just for the sake of it. Because I don't really need that meat most of the time.
No. Any other ideas?
Yeah, we should all have backyard chickens.
Yes. Actually, I did a study with someone and we looked at what is the most economical thing to grow at home, which minimises the use of the amount of water that you use and the amount of fertilisers that you use and gives you best bang for buck in terms of the nutrients you get back, and it's backyard chickens. Because they eat your food scraps and they give you eggs.
So we've got chickens and we do give them lots of scraps, but sometimes I think I could be too careless because I know they're going for the chickens. Where it is so easily, you take bits off your vegetables that you could really use to make soup out of, but we tend to cut more than what we need, or the outside of the lettuce, you could probably just rinse it off. But you tend to just give a bit more.
Yeah. But at least you're giving it to the chickens.
Yes, you are.
Yeah, that's right. So, what about catering? What about it? Well, the convention centres, they're told to make sure the food that's on the platters that goes out is always kept up high. So if it goes down low, they remove the platter, and once that platter's been touched, it can't be eaten by someone else. They've got to ditch it. So supermarkets, we all go for the apple that looks the best. Maybe we should start buying the apples that look really ugly.
I suppose something that came to mind when you mentioned that earlier was like, if you were going to get, your tomates or your agulla from your yamba, or, it would be like this huge tomato that's all lumpy and bumpy, and, if you saw that in the supermarket, you probably wouldn't buy it, but like you get it from your papa and you eat it, and it's like, it's the best tomato you've had. So
that's
that
right.
should help you think about buying that ugly produce.
And the supermarkets react to what we say, right? If we say something, they'll change. And they don't do it because they care about the environment. They care about their income. So a few years ago, Cadbury was going to put palm oil in their chocolate. There was such an outcry, they reversed it. Now, palm oil would have been the cheaper option for them, right? But there was such an outcry from the public that they reversed it. Remember when Adelaide Zoo was going to cut out Golden North ice cream as their producer, and it was going to another one, and Nick Xenophon stood out front, and he was going to introduce the bill which said that food had to indicate if there was palm oil in it, right? Because at the moment, all foods need to label themselves with it's just vegetable oil. And vegetable oil could include anything from olive oil to palm oil. They don't need to specify. And Nick Xenophon was actually going to get them to say if you put palm oil in, it had to be labelled as palm oil. So that the public knew what they were doing. You know, there's all these little things. So you can make a difference, right? You know, the other big thing, there's a big push now, is for people to take their Tupperware, for want of a better word, containers to stores and ask them to put your fruit, you know, your salami, shouldn't it be salami, your olives and all the things from the deli into your own plastic containers so they don't use plastic bags. So if enough people demand it, they're going to do it.
There's a problem there, though, isn't there? Because the merchants are exposed to litigation that contains disease.
Yeah, it's interesting because how is it, I get that, but how is it any different? Can they control what you do with that food once you've bought it, whether it's in their plastic or your plastic?
When a person gets sick and he blames the supermarket for getting sick.
Yeah.
And so
but what if I use their packaging and I got sick? Are they not concerned about that? I could keep it out all day. Yeah. So I think they've got to rethink the process. I think we've got to pressure them to say, look, this is what we want. Because they listen to us because we provide them their money.
How are we supposed to buy ugly fruits when there are no ugly fruits to buy?
Woolies does it.
Odd bunch.
Odd bunch, yeah. Woolies does it. So, and then just tweet them.
Yeah.
There was a classic example with On the Run
Yes.
a couple of weeks ago with the coffees.
Yeah.
And how people demanded to use to bring in their own cups.
Yeah,
for the coffee, and they said, no, we're not doing it.
Yeah. And they claim there was heavy metal in a cup, and there is no way that anyone could identify heavy metal in a contaminated cup by just looking at it, unless he was Superman and had X-ray vision, right? So,
got to have something grotty in there. People are grots.
Well, they are. Yeah.
Right, so you're going to put your coffee in somebody else's grotty cup, right, as a business owner, and then you're open to the consequences of having done that legally. So
But the government can change the rules.
Well, they haven't changed the rules.
We can pressure them.
People to put things in grotty cups. The business owner's not going to do that. He's
Yeah,
already got
but
so many things controlling him.
But On the Run is one of the only ones that won't do it. And there's a lot of coffee shops in Adelaide that will fill up, bring your own mug.
Because they're smaller businesses and they need the business. On the Run can make a stand.
But, you know, we vote with our feet.
People that handle your fruit and veg, they clean their hands when they touch the money between every interaction.
Yeah, that's right.
The dirtiest thing you can put your hands on. So.
This is a bit of a Seinfeld scene. I don't know if anyone here remembers Seinfeld.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. You know that scene where he goes to his girlfriend's dad's pizza store and I was in the loo down at the My Centre one day, and you know what someone's doing in the store next to you, right? Whether it's ones or twos. And this person was definitely not doing number ones. It was all right. And I get out, and then the person next to me in the cubicle gets out. She was wearing a McDonald's uniform, did not wash her hands, went straight out into the food court and back to work. I know.
Surely she would wash her hands at work. You would hope so.
But she had to do it for me. I saw it.
Yeah,
I was like Seinfeld in that very moment. I relived that Seinfeld scene. So, yeah.
Can I just ask what Australia's percentage is in the whole scheme of the global situation?
In terms of what the...
So if every single one of us did exactly what you say, what effect would it have?
Well, if you don't throw out that 450 grams of beef, you're saving 900 litres of water, was it? No, 6 months worth of 7-minute showers.
Yeah,
So everyone makes a difference.
But if your diet's 2% meat, as you're saying is the ideal, then all of that, we count up all the numbers, really it's not a lot of use.
Yeah, but it's all the other stuff as well.
So what if the 50,000 is 45,500 is rain, right? It doesn't matter. It's just a statistic, but it doesn't matter.
But that's where the science tell us it does matter.
It doesn't. It just calculated a number, but it doesn't.
Sorry?
You shouldn't include rainfall.
Well, the rainfall, but the rainfall could be used to grow grains, which would feed more people.
Yeah, well, where do we get rain from? Water from? We get it from rain, so that's. I think you should still count rain, right?
Yeah.
That's a reasonable.
It is. It is.
It's an irrelevant statistic. It really is.
I was just going to say...
I don't think it is. Yeah.
Is there any statistic on controllable water consumption versus all water consumption?
What do you mean by controllable water consumption?
So, for example, production water that goes into farming versus rainfall, which when it hits the ground you can't do anything about at that point.
Yeah, and that's true. But remember, we don't get much rainfall in Australia. So when we were looking at what sort of produce best grows in backyards, given the amount of rainfall we get, there's not a lot you can grow on the Adelaide Plains that will actually cost you more than if you buy it at the fruit and veg store. Okay? Purely on the economic basis. Now, yes, you get joy out of it, you show kids how to grow food, all that sort of stuff is fine, right? But growing food in the Adelaide Hills where they get more rainfall actually makes it cheaper. Okay? But the issue is, if you're having the beef and you're ditching it and you're losing that water that was made to have that beef and it contributes to methane gases, it's that whole impact it has on the environment.
Methane gases are third thing in discussion.
Well, it isn't. It isn't. It's scientifically proven.
Okay. Sorry to, I know we're having a very stimulating discussion, but we actually still have the second part of the talk with Father Stewart, which we do have to do. So
sorry.
No, don't apologise. We've had good discussion. Thank you very much, Evangeline, for that talk. We'll just kind of like a 2-minute stretch, get up and move your arms around, and then as Father Stewart steps up, and then we'll start the next part. That's good. Thanks.